Find more podcasts like this one by going to rustymicradio.com.
Oliver Wilson was listed as John Doe, number 191.
She was convicted of murder more than 20 years ago, but tonight attorneys fighting for a battered woman's freedom say there's a lot we haven't heard about her story of abuse and desperation.
Debbie Peagler was 15 when she first met Oliver Wilson.
I thought, he's kind of cute.
Oliver was a hustler. You can pimp your mama, pimp your daughter. You can't have no sympathy.
He was just kicking me and kicking me. And I was like, okay, I promise, I'll do it, I promise, I'll do it next time, I promise, just please don't hit me no more.
Debbie's mother suggested to Debbie that she let Ramon Sibley and little Timmy Lively make Oliver leave her alone.
But I didn't want no bad to kill him, but I wanted so bad to beat the hell out of him.
If she had been charged appropriately, she would have served a maximum of 6 years in prison. Instead, by the time we took her case, she had already been in for 20 years and been denied release by the parole board twice. This is not what we normally do. We do land use, real estate. Heck, I can get you zoned to be an airport if that's what you want. But I don't represent inmates. I don't represent people charged with crimes. I don't represent criminals.
How do you go about finding hospital records, police records, witnesses from 25 years ago?
He lied. He perjured himself on the stand, and the DA's office has kept it secret.
That matters under civil litigations. We're not going to discuss that.
Get me out of here.
Free Debbie now! Free Debbie!
The victim's family has no objection to her coming home, so who are you to keep her in there?
The hundreds of thousands of dollars or 3 years of time, this will all be for naught if we give up now.
A deal is in the works that would have finally set her free, but there may be a snag.
If we are able to secure her freedom, then what it says to me is that there is hope.
I have to tell you, just looking at the promo, I'm getting emotional. On the end of the line, I have filmmaker Yoav Potash. Yoav, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov.
Thank you. It's Erev Tov here in California.
Yes. Well, I think you're already in Boker, aren't you? What time is it?
Yeah, I guess so. It is Boker Tov here too, technically. It's 12:30 in the morning.
We so appreciate you doing this. Crime After Crime has just been shown, or is being shown on the OWN network, Oprah Winfrey's network, in the States. And it's being shown tonight here on, is it Yes Docu channel?
Yep, that's right.
80% of women in California prisons are victims of rape and abuse.
That's right. Not just in California prisons. Really, in any women's prison anywhere in the world, 80% or more are victims of abuse, victims of rape, incest, in some cases forced prostitution, and in many of those cases, those experiences led to the situations for these women to be in prison. And that's just a factor that has been overlooked for decades and decades.
Now, Debbie Peagler, when she was found guilty, and not by jury, I don't think, she pled guilty to avoid the death sentence, special circumstances. Her abuse wasn't allowable in court. They dismissed that evidence. Is that right?
Well, back in if you think back to the early 1980s and late 1970s, at that time, we as a society in America and around the world, we weren't really talking about domestic violence. Many people hadn't even heard that phrase. And we hadn't. It was an issue that hadn't come out of the shadows, just in our culture, let alone in our courts. So at that point in time, no, it was not talked about in Deborah Peagler's case. And if anything, at that time, if it had been talked about, the fact that this guy Oliver Wilson had beat Deborah, had forced her into prostitution, had essentially kind of kept her as his property for years, it could have even been seen as a motive for Deborah to have killed him. And therefore, it might not have helped her at all. It might have been like, well, of course you killed him. This is the reason why you did, and therefore we're sentencing you to death or to life in prison.
But
in the decades since, we've sort of woken up as a society that, hey, domestic violence is wrong, and in some of these situations, these women did try to escape. Like in Deborah's case, she did go to police, and when Oliver Wilson was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon against Deborah and her family, he was just put in jail for a night, and then released, which just heightened the danger she was in.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And eventually, and did kill Wilson, and Deborah was connected to that crime, and she was prosecuted right alongside the two men who actually did kill him.
But it's the prosecutor's discretion what to charge her with. He doesn't have to go for the death sentence, and even if it doesn't go into court, he knows what was going on, so why did he decide to pursue this so aggressively at the time?
I think prosecutors do often seek the maximum sentence that they can, even though they are technically not supposed to do that. They are just supposed to seek the appropriate sentence. But there's often this sort of game of cat and mouse, or chicken, perhaps, is what it really is, where the prosecutors are posturing that they're going to prosecute very, very aggressively in order to try to force the defendant to enter a plea bargain. And that's exactly what happened in Deborah's case. The prosecutor postured that he would pursue the death penalty for Deborah and for one of the other co-defendants. And they both, of course, did not want to be put to death, and in order to make sure that they would not be put to death, they pled guilty so that they would, quote-unquote, only receive a sentence of life in prison.
Only. Life, can you imagine? You became involved because you're friends with the lawyer. Now, as I understand, he's not a criminal lawyer. How did Joshua get involved?
Joshua was a land use lawyer for the most part, real estate, that sort of thing. And he got involved just because his co-counsel, Nadia, heard about this project called the Habeas Project, which was basically about getting representation for these women and using a new law that California initiated in 2002 that would allow women who are in prison for these types of crimes, with these types of situations, to now go back to the court and introduce the evidence that was not heard before, the evidence that he beat me every day for 4 years or 5 years. He forced me into prostitution. He threatened to kill my mother and myself and my daughter. And none of this was looked at back in 1983. And if you look at all of this other evidence, perhaps I've already served enough time for my part in this crime. That's the idea of this law. That's the idea of Joshua's representation of Deborah.
And I don't want to give too much away at all, if I can help it, because it's on tonight. But I can see just from the clips that I've seen that he gets very, very emotionally involved in what's going on.
That's right. Both for Joshua and for Nadia, Deborah became much more than a client, and for Deborah herself, I think the three of them, in a way, became like family for one another. Joshua and Nadia did not just sign on to submit a petition. petition to court and see what would happen. They signed on to get this woman out of prison because she had served at least 15 years too long relative to, her actions.
Do you think today she would have gone down at all?
It's hard to say. According to laws today, she really should not have. And in fact, today, courts are much more receptive to testimony about domestic violence and about sex trafficking. That's a topic that people have begun to pay attention to a lot more in the last few years. And of course, it's a problem in Israel as well.
The whole world.
Absolutely. It's worldwide. And Deborah was a victim of sex trafficking. And when you have a girl, in Deborah's case, she was a teenage girl, 16 years old, when Oliver first beat her and forced her into prostitution. So when you have a situation that begins like that, and eventually that girl has some sort of role in fighting back and killing the pimp, I think most people at least understand that that's a different situation than murdering someone in cold blood, for their money or for some other set of reasons. Maybe it's not pure self-defense, but it's a little bit closer to self-defense than courts and prosecutors have led us to believe in the past. So that's the concept. But for Joshua and Nadia, I think part of the reason why they became so close to Deborah is that each of them in their own past had experiences with domestic violence as well.
Oh, wow. So that made it incredibly personal. But what about you as the filmmaker? How did you come out of this experience of making this film?
Very changed. I went into it just looking for a good story, and I knew I had one here. I knew it was very high stakes, life and death, freedom versus incarceration, and I knew it had great characters. All these individuals are really interesting and dynamic and well-rounded. But I wasn't passionate about issues like the ones we've been talking about, sex trafficking and the law and so on. I really didn't know a lot about all of that. But by telling Deborah's story, it really opened my eyes to what a big problem this is. And I'm glad to be opening other people's eyes now with her story.
And it's been incredibly well received. I'm just looking, it's been selected for the 2011 Sundance Film Festival, Audience Choice Award for San Francisco International Film Festival, Golden Gate Award for Investigative Documentary Feature for the San Francisco International Film Festival, Justice Matters Jury Prize, Washington, D.C. International Festival, Grand Performance Documentary, Los Angeles Film Festival, Best Editing, Milan International Film Festival, Henry Hampton Award for Excellence and Film and Digital. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And not last but by no means least, the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival also gave you an award. It's been incredibly well received. Which is all power to you.
It's been awesome. It has been great. I mean, it was a real labor of love to make this film. It was, it was something I was doing right alongside this case as it was happening. So none of us knew how it would end. None of us knew if Deborah would ever be released from prison or not. And so after 5.5 years of making the film, it's really nice to see it being received so well and seeing it make a difference in the world. When I first began making the film, I thought it was only going to take a year. But I even though it took much longer, I certainly don't regret a minute of it. And I think the reason why not is the moment that I met Deborah herself in that maximum security prison in California, I was really hooked on telling her story and on who she was, because while she could have been bitter for having been abused and having been wronged by the justice system. She was absolutely an inspiring person to be around. She leads the gospel choir inside the prison, was teaching other inmates to read and write. She was getting college degrees herself from behind bars. So that's what I mean when I say, this film has amazing characters in it, and she's foremost among them. And it's a great honor for me to have the chance to tell her story.
Now, it's being shown on... has it already been shown on Oprah's channel yet? Or it's going to be?
Yes, it was just shown in the U.S. On television for the first time last week. And then tonight it will be shown in Israel on television for the first time.
It's amazing. Israel, I guess... I mean, okay, the male lawyer, I believe, is an Orthodox Jew, but...
That's right. And Deborah is an African-American Christian, so seemingly there are two people, that have very little in common, and yet you actually, as you watch the film, you realize they do have some things in common. They both have had these experiences with abuse, and now they both must work together to try to prove what Deborah has been through in order for her to be reunited with her family outside of those prison walls.
And what's next for Yoav?
Right now, I'm really still a little focused on just getting... I feel like this film was my baby, so now I'm helping my baby go to college. It's like my baby's graduated high school, but I'm still responsible and still involved in just seeing it get out into the world and in as many languages as possible, to as many countries as possible, and in a few different varieties. We an hour-and-a-half long version of the film, and then we have a 1-hour version of the film. So I think at least through the rest of the year, I'm going to just continue to help this film along, and then next year I'll really start thinking about perhaps a whole new project. After 5.5 years,
right.
You can't just snap your fingers and move on. It takes a little bit of a process.
Vacation in Israel, perhaps, between the two projects?
I would love that. I would really love that.
You said half your family lives here.
Yeah, I do have. I have a lot of cousins, and my cousins have children. I have, uncles and aunts there. So I would love for a film festival in Israel to show the film, and then I'll come out and show the film and visit family, and I think really a lot of organizations in Israel, be they legal associations or domestic violence prevention groups, or even just religious groups, synagogues, what have you. I mean, those are all the types of organizations that in the United States and elsewhere are really connecting with this film. You mentioned Joshua's Orthodox Judaism, and it doesn't just come up in the film sort of incidentally. He really talks about specific Jewish values and even prayers that he says every day that connect with the idea of getting someone out of prison when an injustice has been the foundation for locking someone up. Of course, there's a number of stories in the Torah that sort of mirror this idea of someone being in prison wrongly.
And of course, in Israel, we just brought...
There's a lot there for everyone.
We just brought Gilad Shalit home after 8 years and of incarceration. It's very different, but I think there's an emotional connection in Israel right now. And I don't want to give away the end of the film at all, but I can imagine that showing it, particularly if you've got Oprah's backing, is having some repercussions with the district attorney's office in LA.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the district attorney's office in Los Angeles has written a nasty letter or two, really about unfortunately, about Deborah, not so much about the film, because they on the one hand say the film is full of lies, and on the other hand say they haven't watched it and they refuse to watch it. So it shows you sort of their factual basis. It's like, I mean, how could they know it's full of lies if they refuse to watch it?
Right, and I'm surprised because they're so far distanced from the Attorney General, because it's a political position. From them, they could say, look, you know what, they made lots of mistakes, but we're not the same Attorney Generals, and we'll clear it up. And they could do that. And there's no political connections anymore between 20 years ago and today.
Right. And as you see in the film that they had that opportunity, and they almost took that opportunity to say, hey, some mistakes were made 20 years ago, and we're willing to admit that, and we're willing to let Deborah out of prison because of that. And then they decided not to honor that position, even though they actually went so far as to put it in writing in recent years. So that is what really made this case escalate and made it become a huge public battle, both in court and in the media, and something that, as it dragged on, was continuing to tarnish the Los Angeles District Attorney's reputation, and also made Deborah and her attorneys just dig in that much deeper and say, we're not giving up no matter what. Now is a great time for prosecutors to look and say, maybe it's time for a change from the past. It's no secret that in California and in many states in America, states are spending far too much money relative to the current economy, and they actually need to have less people in
prison, right?
So the states don't keep spending money like crazy. And these women, these victims of abuse, who eventually fought back, and they've already been in prison for 20 years or more. They are, I think, a prime candidate for U.S. taxpayers to save a little bit of money, let these women go home, reunite with their children, and move on with their lives, and let the state move on in terms of where it's putting its resources.
So, Crime After Crime is showing tonight on the documentary channel on Yes. I can't remember what number it is, but it's Yes Docu, and I think it's on. Is it 10 o'clock tonight?
I am not totally certain.
I will know by the end of this. Oh, here we go. 10:14. What a weird time. 10:14 p.m. That's Israel for you. We go to 10:14 p.m. Not 15 and not 16, but 10:14.
Yeah, I don't understand it. It might be wise to just tune in at 10, just in case.
Yeah, then you get the 14 minutes of terrible advertising.
Is that what it's all about? Well, I don't know. You know better than me.
Listen, I'm so pleased we got to talk. I think this is an incredible thing you've done, and I'm going to be watching it because I can't tell. I'm watching the promos, feeling emotional. So I don't know what's going to happen when I watch the movie. I'm going to get into bed in tears. My wife loves. She loves seeing a man show his emotions, so she'll be over the moon.
Yeah, it's a very, very moving film, and I will say, without giving anything away, I think that the film has sort of, on the one hand, it is frustrating to see the injustices, and on the other hand, there's a lot of inspiration to take from it.
Well, we'll be watching. I know it's 1 o'clock in the morning, so you really need to go to bed. And I so appreciate you spending the time, and just thanks to Mimi for passing it to me so we could talk about this before the show goes out, the documentary goes out, and we'll be watching it very carefully tonight. I'm sorry. I'm confused as well now. Have a great night.
Thank you. And if people want to learn more about the film, the website is crimeaftercrime.com. And we also have a Facebook page that you can link to there through the website.
when we put this podcast up, which we'll do very quickly, we'll make sure that link goes with it, and people can find you easily, because it really is worth looking. Definitely.
Great. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Take care. Good night.
This is Rusty Mike Radio.
Online now.
www.rustymikeradio.com.